SoundCartel.
Unless you're incredibly lucky, you're likely relying on debt to run your business. Scary, but if you use debt safely, it can not only be beneficial, but allow you to sleep that much better at night. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. What's your approach to debt? Maybe you view debt as part and parcel of running a business, or maybe you wouldn't go near it with a 10-foot barge pole. But it would be fair to say that many people use debt to help navigate their business lives. It can be useful, of course, but it can also be risky and worrying. Yet it needn't be either of those things, if you listen to property expert Steve McKnight. Over many years of successful property investing, Steve understands the use of debt, or more specifically, safe debt. Now that sounds good, but what does it mean? Steve McKnight is talking to Heather Dawson.
Debt is borrowing income or money that you haven't yet earned and spending it today. So that means that once you've spent money, you have an obligation to earn money to repay it. People fail to understand that. They think debt is getting their hands on money and they'll worry about repaying it in the future, but they haven't equated, and this is the important point, debt to time. When you borrow money for a credit card or a car or even a house, you are saying that I'm agreeing to work tomorrow without the benefit of the pay tomorrow because I'm going to consume it today. Now, we can apply this at a household level. You or I or anyone listening, we could apply it at a business level. We can even apply it at a governmental level and a world level. So if the Australian government is borrowing more than the income that's coming in from taxes and other sources, then what it's saying is that the taxes of tomorrow we're spending today, which brings forward consumption but then creates a hole or a vacuum tomorrow. Bringing that back down to a household level, if we consume a lot today, then we're going to have to work tomorrow without being able to spend that money tomorrow because we're going to have to use that to pay debt, interest and loan repayments today. So how do you use debt safely? Well, there's really only one use of debt that's safe, and that is to borrow at an interest rate lower than what you can earn by deploying that money on a yield in investment. Simply, if you're borrowing at 4 or 6%, you've got to earn above 6% in your investments in order to make it worthwhile. If you're borrowing less, then it's risky.
Is that where people get it wrong, that they're unrealistic about what's manageable?
Yes, people get it wrong when they don't know exactly what they're doing. And I've made that mistake. One of the worst things that I ever did was get a car loan straight when I had my first job working in accounting. And I thought it was important for me to have a fancy car, but I didn't realise that I was earning in pre-tax dollars and repaying in post-tax dollars, even though I was an accountant. So another mistake that people make with debt is that they say, oh, the repayments are only $100 a week. It's $5,200 per annum. I can manage that. But they don't understand that in order to end up with $5,200, they might have to earn $6,000 or $6,500 because they have to pay tax, particularly when you're borrowing for items that are non-deductible, such as lifestyle expenses. So we're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty here, but what people need to do when it comes to debt is to manage the risk by naming it, numbering it and numbing it. So naming it is, right, well, I'm going to borrow some money and I can't afford it, which is why I have to borrow. Why can't I afford it? Number one wealth creation strategy that anyone needs to know and must know is to spend less than you earn and create money to invest. So I'm failing that and I'm borrowing more than I earn and I'm entering into a risk situation. Well, how soon can I get out of debt and what would I do if it all turns bad? And because people don't name it, number it or numb it, they just live with this risk over their shoulder that they hope because of luck nothing's ever going to happen, and then that's fine except for the unfortunate souls who find themselves caught in a debt trap. For instance, just met up with someone in my office this morning who was telling me that they've just got unexpectedly separated from their partner and they don't know how they're going to make ends meet because 1 divided by 2 doesn't equal 1, it equals a half. So if you've got a 1 relationship and that splits into 2, then you're each going to end up with half of what you've got, and the debt doesn't necessarily divide by 2. That still needs to be repaid, and it can be quite an obligation for someone.
But there is a place for debt, isn't there? Because look at you, Steve, you've developed this amazing property portfolio and you've used debt. So you just have to number it carefully. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the correct use of debt is to, first of all, see it as a double-edged sword, something that you can cut with and something that can cut you. But to also remember that if you're not earning from investing enough money to repay it, so if you're cash flow negative as a result of borrowing, then you are entering into a high-risk situation, because if you can't afford to repay it, you can't afford it in the first place.
Okay, just remind us again then, what's the safe use of debt?
The safe use of debt is when you can get a higher return than your cost of borrowing.
Now, your audience is small to medium-sized businesses right now, Steve. Do you have a particular message for them as they run their businesses?
Yeah, so, first of all, secret handshake to all the women and men listening to this, because I am a small business owner and I've been a small business owner since I started up my own accounting practice, which has subsequently been sold in, I think it was 1999 or so. So it's 20 years, and I can understand the pressures that come when you're the chief cook and bottle washer. Typically, you pay yourself last and your staff get paid first, but you carry all the risk. And from time to time, you find yourself in a bit of a cash flow shortage, and you may be looking to an overdraft or other debt facility in order to make ends meet. What do we do in a small business when it comes to debt? What we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, where does the working capital come from our business? And what is the return on that working capital? So working capital is money that we've deployed in our business, set up costs, the tooling, etc., to be able to run it. Well, okay, that's a certain amount of money. What return do we get on that? On our sales net divided by our working capital invested in the business, if you like, gives us our return. That's the step one of knowing how much we can afford to borrow, because if we look at the return that we get on our business as an investment, and let's say we're getting 4%, but it costs us 6% to borrow, then our return is lower than our cost of funds. And that difference, that 2%, the wider that is, or the higher it is, the greater the risk. If we're in a situation where we're able to get an 8% return or a 10% return on our investment, on our working capital in the business, then we can borrow, because we can cover the interest repayment out of the surplus of the return we get versus the cost of debt. So understanding the cost of debt and the margin we pay or the margin we make determines whether or not it's safe and how safe or how risky.
Okay, well, putting your property hat on, Steve, and considering debt, what advice have you got for business owners who might like to buy rather than rent their premises?
All too often, I think people make a big mistake, because in business, working capital is very precious. It's the amount of cash that we've got to expand. And when you buy your own business, you're typically putting in 20% deposit, maybe more if it's commercial real estate, which is then tying up capital that you could otherwise invest in your business. And typically on a real estate investment, you might be looking at a 6% return or less. So what I like to do is I say to people, look, if the best use of your working capital is investing in your building, you're probably in the wrong business. If you rent, people say rent money is dead money. Well, it's not dead money at all. Rent money is flexible money. It allows you to grow as your business grows or shrinks as your business shrinks. And instead of having a premises that you buy and then often your business is only as big as your premises, it allows you to make a better business decision when you haven't invested in the premises itself. So I say to people, unless it's some part of a superannuation plan strategy or there's some tax reason for doing it, the better strategy is to rent a premises and use that deposit money that you would otherwise have paid in your business to get a greater return on your money.
And not think about the potential capital value over years going ahead?
Potential capital value is one of those things that you don't know is going to happen. And again, I would rather say to people, if you can invest in your business and drive the return in your business, it's better than investing in a business and real estate together.
But when it comes to buying property, Steve, you're a strong advocate of positive rather than negative gearing. But what's so wrong with negative gearing?
Positive gearing is buying a piece of real estate that puts money in your pocket. So the rent is greater than the expenses. Plus you get capital appreciation. Negative gearing is when the expenses are greater than the income. You make a loss, and then people try and offset that loss against salary income, plus get capital growth. I always took the view that if I wanted to get out of accounting, I needed positive cash flow. I needed the income to replace my accounting salary. Negative gearing wasn't going to do it for me because I'd need to find a way to afford the negative. And so I became Mr. Positive Cash Flow in the first book, which came out in 2003, where I talked about here's a new way of investing. Don't let the tax tail wag the investing dog. Invest in meat and potatoes, cash flow, and capital growth can be gravy on top. Don't invest in gravy and have no meat and potatoes to put it on. Or alternatively, the more property you own that makes money, the better you are. The more property you own that loses money, the worse off you are. Even at a simple level, it makes sense.
So where are the properties with positive cash flow?
Yes, well, the conundrum people ask me all the time is, this is great, McKnight, but where are the positive cash flow properties? And remember that every property that's rented is positive cash flow. It's only the amount that you borrow that determines really how negative that it's going to be. So first of all, I say to people, you need some kind of system that allows you to borrow a sustainable amount of money, and the less you borrow, the higher your net cash flow will be. So maybe you need to move away from this notion of borrowing 90% or 95% of a property's value. You also have to understand that not every property will be positive cash flow on an 80% lend or better. So focusing on areas where the rent is higher, such as regional areas, has always worked better for me. And then the point I would say is these days commercial property tends to be higher positive cash flow than residential real estate.
That was property expert Steve McKnight of propertyinvesting.com. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.